So hello fellow Earthlings, this is Earthling 6455463728, and I wanted to talk about what made Steve Jobs a successful CEO. Before I go too much further, I'd read his a biography that he had done by someone that he respected a lot, and I feel like I should continue. I think I've gone over it once, so like twice. I should probably keep going over it to try and get some more insights. But anyway, without any further ado, number one, the main reason, or one of the main reasons, that Steve Jobs was a good CEO, a successful CEO, I have to make the distinction between good and successful, is that he didn't really care too much about people's feelings. So for example, depending on who the person was, but if they're a subordinate, he didn't have a problem telling someone that he thought that their idea was crap. I think maybe he went too far. Allegedly he was very, very abusive, you could say. Made a lot of people cry, quit on the spot, fired a lot of people on the spot. So, a lot of us, and some might say that might be some kind of, the psychopathic tendencies that help people to rise to the top and help them to make the decisions that need to be made. That's one of the things that people say that, if it's a choice between, let's say killing a whole bunch of old people and killing a whole bunch of young people, or letting them die, a psychopath can make the choice, whereas regular people might have difficulty making any choice at all. They might just freeze. But supposedly, psychopaths are good for society when they are able to make those tough decisions that a normal, quote-unquote, person might not be able to make. So, my sister actually had a book that she had been given to read and supposedly absorb from the place where she worked, and it was about fierce conversations. And what it amounted to was how to just be honest, not to the extent that Steve Jobs was, like abusive, but how to say directly the things that needed to be said that might be keeping a relationship going that should just die, that might be preventing you from increasing your sales or doing the things that would make your life better. And it was a very interesting book. I took a lot from it, and it was a lot of things that I like to say sometimes. I don't feel that I'm abusive to anyone, but some of the things that I do say might shock, or they do shock my friends sometimes, and certainly my family. Like I might ask somebody their age, or I might ask them, straight out if they might be gay or whatever. And I don't always do this, just sometimes. A lot of times I get caught in my head just like everybody else, or I just feel like it's not worth it to take a risk. But some other times I feel that it's interesting, and there are things that, have to be done. Like, I remember a time when I asked someone to help me fix my bike, and they were a welder, and they welded the thing, and I paid them to weld it, and the thing broke, and they took it and redid it, and they came back to me with it, and they wanted to charge me again. And I could have said, well, I don't have the money right now, but basically I told them, listen, why would I pay you twice to do something properly once? I paid you to do this right. If it broke, it's because you didn't do it right. So why would I pay you again? And I felt, that I had to say it, even though it was hard. but I didn't want to keep seeing them and keep lying to them. Or if I go to a store and I look at stuff and I spend time, a lot of times I used to feel that, maybe I'll come back. I might tell somebody, somebody who was helping me. And I was like, why do I keep saying that? I should say I might come back. Or I should say, I'll go look around and maybe you'll see or whatever. But I should never lead somebody down the road where I might come back, I might buy it, when I know, or I will come back, when I know that I have no intention of coming back. So I think that's one of the things that made Steve Jobs really successful, because he was able to cut the dead weight. And I think it's a similar thing with Elon Musk. He fires people. If you look at the news for Tesla and other companies, you would hear that this long-time person is gone and that long-time person is gone. Yeah, sometimes somebody's great at first and then you just have to fire them. I'll give you another example. I remember someone who was working under me for a programming at my programming job when I worked in agriculture for the government. The person came in and I told them, listen. So I told them the particular way that I wanted something done, and they kept insisting that it couldn't be done. It couldn't be done. Now, I might feel that I might need to be able to fire somebody like that, but the proper way of doing it is you're supposed to warn somebody. But anyway, the point is that I couldn't fire anybody, and I felt like I just needed to do something to prove to them that what I was asking them to do was not impossible. So I took some time after work and I did an example of what I was asking them to do, and they were saying that it couldn't be done. And the next day when they came, I showed them, and they had nothing to say, because obviously they were wrong about it not being able to be done that way. So, I feel like that is, it doesn't directly have something to do with what I'm saying about Steve Jobs being able to talk to people anyhow, which way he wanted. And I do think that he went too far. I think he hurt a lot of people around him, socially and in his companies. But at the same time, the positive side of it is that if he felt somebody was amazing, he also let them know it. So, I think in the biography, people were saying that, he might make you feel on top of the world, or the worst, most insignificant organism on the planet. So there's a positive and a negative, and I don't think he needed to be too high or too low. He just needed to be honest. But anyway, that was something. The next thing that I think, number two thing that I think that, well, it's not number two, it's in no specific order. Second thing that I think made Steve Jobs a successful CEO was that he was manipulative. For example, Steve Wozniak was really the genius behind Apple's first major product. I can't remember the name of it. I guess let's call it the Apple One, I think it is. He was a whiz at basically producing that computer and designing, the whole thing. So, well, not, the box, like the plastic parts and all that, but making the thing actually work, he was amazing. And at one point, though, very early on, I think he was working for, was it HP? He decided, he's not so interested in forming this company with Steve Jobs. So Steve Jobs did everything under the sun to convince Steve Wozniak to change his mind and come back and make Apple. He cried. He went to Steve Wozniak's father and told him how amazing the company could be, which completely flipped Steve Wozniak's father's opinion of the company and whether his son should be a part of it. And he talked to everybody around the pair of them to convince Steve Wozniak to continue with the company. And throughout his career, Steve Jobs, he did similar things like that to get the people that he felt needed to be in his company, or to make people work harder and harder, however much overtime, to make things exactly right. So this, the ability to not have shame and cry when you need to, or beg when you need to, or talk to whoever you need to try and get what you want done, that is, I think, something that really helped him to get what he wanted done. Another reason I think that Steve Jobs was able to be a successful CEO is because of his attention to detail. His father was an engineer, I believe, and Steve Jobs wasn't one of these people, these CEOs who basically, they take meetings and they're just managing the high level stuff, and they're not really too concerned about the details, about this, about the product, or that about the product. They might not even know the product that well inside and out. He was the guy who was always looking at what was being produced. He was always looking at different ways of things might be produced. So really one very good example I can think of is, initially I believe the iPhone was going to have a plastic screen, but he took it home and he had it in his pocket. He had it in his pocket, and he had his car keys and whatever keys also in his pocket for a week. And at the end of the week, this was something that he came up to his engineers about, and he was like, listen, look how scratched this screen is. We can't have this. This is not going to work. And he made sure to push them along the path to have, glass and Gorilla Glass, and to have something, where can we find something that is not going to scratch like this, So he was actually in there. He didn't invent a lot of this stuff, but he was very close to the production line kind of thing, or the design line, where he would be face to face with the engineers every day. As a matter of fact, sometimes he would be calling people at whatever hour of the night that a thought came to him. If he woke up in the middle of the night on a weekend, he might be calling his engineers and saying, this is what I think about the color, this is what I think about the design, this is what I think about the material, this is what I think about whatever it is, and that attention to detail. I remember that, I have two examples. I used to work at a library at my university, and one day the head of the library decided that in order to make sure that security was high for the library, because I guess there were people who were coming in who were not students using the library or whatever it might be, he wanted everybody all the time to show their ID when they were coming into the library. And the idea is that you're showing it every time, so anybody who looks at you and they're not from the school, they realize, whoa, they check every time, don't even bother to come in here. But when it came down to enforcing this, if I had to enforce it, let's say, there was a particular girl who was very upset that she showed me her ID when an employee, she showed me her ID when she I guess, came in, and then she had to go back out, and then she had to come back in again, and she was upset that she had to show me her ID again. All the time she was upset. And, the head of the library, he made this showing that, okay, when he's coming in, he's going to show his library. But he's not at the front. Like, he didn't put himself at the front, let's say, for an hour one day to make sure that everybody knew that it was something that he wanted, that the command came straight from him. And, that eventually meant that people like me, who had to face the wrath of employees who didn't want to keep showing their ID, I was on my own. And eventually, nobody was showing any IDs whatsoever. Or, for example, my sibling, when her boss says to her, well, listen, you need the other people to do this, and she tells them to do it, they oftentimes won't do it. But when she reports that to the boss is telling her that if she was a better leader, then the people would follow her. But, basically the boss has a okay relationship with the people under one particular kid who doesn't want to do what she's saying. And if she sends him to speak to the kid or directs him, he doesn't want to. People don't want to be the bad guy. They don't want to have people feel that they're not a nice person. And that's one of the things that Steve Jobs never had a problem with, Or, for example, my uncle hit his head. We took him to the doctor, to the hospital to get, x-rayed and stuff. And every once in a while, they would come into this particular room and they would say, all the relatives, you guys can't stay in here, you'll have to go outside. And because we need this space for all of our all of the patients and so on. The thing is, my uncle has dementia. He can't tell you what my number is to call me. He doesn't know my name to call me. He may, he might need changing. He might need to decide, he's leaning to one side, and the next thing you know, that's the reason why he fell. I left him unattended for a couple of moments or a while, and he fell and hit his head. So if somebody is adamant that I have to leave, that doesn't make any sense. But that is something that people were actually adamant about. Luckily for me, I suppose one or two employees would turn up and say, no, that guy's okay, he can stay. I don't know why they decided that I could stay or not, but they did. My uncle can't even stand on his own. So I think that CEOs who delegate and employees face conflicting forces. They may have a force that is adamant that, in this case, the relatives cannot stay, and they may be blind to anything else that makes sense. In which case, this is a special case. I have to stay with my uncle because he doesn't know anything. He can't respond in any way to the situation. And if somebody demands that, there's almost no point in taking my uncle to the hospital, because it's ridiculous. I have to stay with him, whether it's to get him to stand up, to go into a wheelchair, to explain what the problem is, or to feed him, or to change him, or to anything. So, but I feel like a lot of CEOs get in that space where, I'm a CEO, I should delegate and I shouldn't. But there are a lot of specific or special cases that the rules, the management rules, don't apply to, or they can't fit, or they can't take into account. And if the CEOs are removed from the day-to-day operations at almost every level, there can be a lot of things that are happening that some of them might even threaten the company. But because the CEO feels that everybody below me knows what they're supposed to do, no, you need to know in many cases more than they do, because the buck stops with you. So I think that his attention to detail is something that helped Steve Jobs remain a good CEO. That said, though, well, I think another one, and maybe number four, Steve Jobs supposedly had this reality distortion field that a lot of CEOs are apparently have, where they tell you things that they don't seem like they add up, but they might be very inspirational, and they make you believe in something that seems very unlikely, and as a result of that, they might be able to achieve these things that might be very unlikely. So he was really able to inspire people to do things beyond what they might have thought they were capable of doing. Now, some of the things that I think that made Steve Jobs a horrible CEO was, of course, his abusiveness, the fact that he didn't care about people's feelings, the fact that he might push you to do something that really is impossible, but and the fact that he was manipulative. I did a piece about how your greatest strength is your greatest, or can be your greatest weakness. It's just that things that have a high magnitude, for example, if somebody is very strong, it might mean that they easily break things, so it's a great thing to be strong, but if it's something that requires a lot of detail, that strength can be can have a huge downside. With everything that I've said, though, I feel that the kind of person that Steve Jobs was, when you take everything that I said into account, I feel that Apple has reached a design and a creative pinnacle with him, and even with respect to the fact that they can still continue to produce a great product, as in the iPhone, I think that the reality distortion field that Steve Jobs had in imagining something that nobody had come up with, this smartphone that didn't have any buttons on it at all, I think that kind of creativity is gone, because right now at the firm they have their cash cow, which is the iPhone, that they can keep tweaking and making marginal improvements. They have the iPod, they have the App Store, and so on. There isn't anybody, the guy at the head is Tim Cook. He's not the guy who is going to have this great, amazing. Tim Cook is not going to be able to, I don't see him being as detailed as Steve Jobs would have been, which is like, going down to the engineering department and making sure, or not even making sure, I don't know that he would have as much interest as Steve Jobs might have. And in, let's say, for example, looking at some new technology and saying, wow, what can we do with this thing? How can this be a great product that nobody has ever seen before? I don't think that that's something that Tim Cook is really going to be good at, And unfortunately, I think that's something that happens a lot with companies. And worse than that, is if it is that Tim Cook isn't the champion of a particular new thing, it means that it's just going to die. I think that's what made Steve Jobs a successful CEO, in that if he saw something, he's the guy. Nobody can be a greater champion than the CEO of a company. And there are a lot of great ideas and modifications to a company that die before what am I saying, before, that never reach to the CEO's office, and they don't know what is down there. The managers might not want someone beneath them to make them look like they don't know what they're doing, so they might suppress something that is really amazing. Unfortunately, I think that is where we are with respect to Tim Cook and Apple. I think that at some point Apple is going to stagnate because they're just not going to be able to think outside the box, because Tim Cook isn't that guy. He's not the guy who's going to go down and see the amazing things that the magicians have come up with and champion it all the way to a new product. So anyway, guys, sorry for no pieces yesterday or videos yesterday, and was it the day before as well? My uncle hit his head, so I spent the time at the hospital there with him, like I mentioned. But as always, wish me lucks. You can like or unlike, you can comment, subscribe, and or share. Peace.